Well, hello everyone. We're on our last week together as far as Bible content is concerned. We're going to deal with the last half of the writing section, which is the last section of the Hebrew Bible. So at the end of this lecture, we will be done walking through the books of the Bible. Of course, next week you will have to finish your paper, but we won't have any more lectures on the theology of the particular books in the Old Testament. Um, Again, I'm going to try to keep this lecture relatively brief. I want you to spend more time. Well, I'll say it this way. I'd rather these lectures be for your own benefit as far as me summarizing the material than they are for me walking through details, because the details are given to you in your textbook. So I'm trying to give you a big overview of the big picture of the canon here. So, if you remember last week, in the first half of the writings, we went from looking for the wise king who suffers for his people to the virtuous woman, and then we saw them in Song of Solomon, sort of the pinnacle of that section. We saw them in the garden, delighting in one another, the virtuous king and his virtuous bride. And it's a picture of the garden, the return to the garden. It's a picture of salvation. It's a picture of what Christ is coming to do. So that's what we're looking for. This week, we're going to get a reality check. We're going to get a reality check, first of all, through poetry and then through narrative. So, first of all, in poetry, Ecclesiastes sort of gut checks us. And we go from Song of Solomon with this hope that everything is better or getting better to everything is meaningless. The word that is used for vanity, and this is just an outline for you. I guess I should point out a couple things here. First of all, the book moves from cataloging vanities to fearing God. You'll notice here it's the same thing: catalog of vanities, fear God. Life under the sun isn't quite the same as cataloging vanities, but it's similar. And then you end the book again on the fear of the Lord, paths of wisdom and foolishness. Now, and you notice here fearing God pops up again. So, the message of the book is basically that everything on the earth, everything that you can find happiness from, is hevel. It's the same word as Abel in Genesis 4, and it means vapor. It's the idea of everything is just a wisp. It's fleeting, it's ephemeral, it's elusive, it's not lasting. And as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7:31, the present form of the world is passing away. This doesn't mean that God is going to go Death Star on everything at the end, but that right now everything is under the sin of the curse of sin and death. Everything is going to pass away, and so we need to find meaning in life in the fear of the Lord. That's the message of this book. It reminds me of the story that Jesus tells of the two men, one who built his house on the rock, one who built his house on the sand. And the idea is don't build your house on the sand. Again, though, relating it back to what we've already talked about, you've got toil in Genesis 3:18, and then here, Adam's toil is fruitless. Solomon, or the preacher in Ecclesiastes, he doesn't have fruit that will last. And also, Lady Folly is a connection we can make. So we can make a connection to Genesis 3. We can make a connection to Lady Folly, because Lady Folly shows up in chapter 5. And she's also in Lamentations. And she's sort of at the center of the book here. And the point is that following after Lady Folly only brings hevel. It only brings vanity. So again, we've got this play on the king and Lady Folly this time, and it leads to vanity. And so Ecclesiastes 12:3, the end of the matter has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. That's the solution of Proverbs as well, is to fear God, the fear of the Lord. So what we have in Ecclesiastes is, what we have in Ecclesiastes is a gut check. Song of Solomon gives us this sort of remarkable hope about the salvation that Yahweh brings, and you got the king we've been waiting for with his bride we've been waiting for in the renewed garden we've been waiting for. But with Ecclesiastes we're reminded, no, everything under the sun is vanity. None of this is lasting. And none of it brings happiness, only the fear of the Lord does. And so we're left waiting. We're reminded that we haven't seen the coming of the eternal God to earth yet. We haven't seen him cleanse his bride eternally, make her. We haven't seen God renew the face of the earth eternally, and so we're still waiting. We're still looking forward. The same is true in Lamentations. Lamentations is a poem. Sorry, my allergies are killing me. Lamentations is a poem traditionally attributed to Jeremiah. It happens right after the fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC. And it's an acrostic. So each chapter, chapters 1 through 4, is an acrostic. That means that each new line starts with the new letter of the alphabet. Chapter 5 is not an acrostic. Everything except chapter 3 contains 22 verses, which is the number of letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And then chapter 3 contains 66 verses, so that's 22 letters times 3. So lots of poetic devices being used here. But really the key point is that Jerusalem is destroyed. And so once again, we find both in terms of theodicy and then in terms of our canonical perspective, we've got, first of all, theodicy, like, why is this happening? So in Ecclesiastes, it's why do the rich prosper even though they're evil, and the poor don't, even though they're good? Here in Lamentations, it's the same sorts of questions, in that the question is, why does God allow this to happen? Why isn't he stopping it? Particularly related to the covenant. I mean, the author of Lamentations brings up the covenant over and over and over again. God, we're the covenant people. Why don't you stop? Why aren't you punishing the nations that did this to us? And then you also have, in terms of our canonical point, you got the language of in the open place and in the square, which is the language used of Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly, who are trying to get men in the square, in the streets. In Lamentations, Lady Folly wins, because Israel has pursued Lady Folly. And so in Ecclesiastes and in Lamentations, the author pursues Lady Folly. In Ecclesiastes, the author is the preacher who seems to be linked to Solomon, which gives us the idea that it's the king. In Lamentations, it's Jerusalem and the people of Israel that are speaking, and they have pursued Lady Folly as well. And in both cases, the result is vanity. And again, what we see is that what we're hoping for in Song of Solomon is definitely not a reality in Lamentations. Jerusalem has been utterly destroyed. The city of God, the temple of God, have been wiped out. And so we're still waiting, is the point. But in Lamentations, chapter 3 is pivotal because the author proclaims, "Great is thy faithfulness." There's still covenantal hope. In the book of Lamentations, this chapter is pivotal, both in terms of the book's concepts and in terms of its structure, because even though the book doesn't necessarily exude hope in chapters 4 and 5, the tone shifts. And because of the way that the poetic devices work, chapter 3 is obviously highlighted in the way that it has 66 verses instead of 22 and all the rest. So chapter 3 is definitely important both conceptually and structurally. And again, the point is we're waiting for that hope. Song of Solomon pictured it, but it's not here yet. Lamentations still points us forward. So let me pause here for a moment, reflect on the relationship between Songs, Ecclesiastes, and Lamentations, particularly that Lady Folly point. And we'll jump back in with Esther in just a minute. All right, so Esther. What we're going to see for the rest of the time is that we're looking forward to the hope that is to come. In Esther and Daniel, we're going to see narrative depictions of the hope that's in the midst of the exile. And then when we get to Ezra, Nehemiah, Chronicles, we're going to see hope even after the return from exile. So Esther is, I'm sure you know the story of Esther. Basically, there's a conflict between, there's conflict between a bunch of people. But the main conflict is between Haman, who is an Agagite. So if you remember in 1 Samuel, Saul refused to kill Agag, the king of the Amalekites, and the Amalekites were historical enemies of Israel. And so there's this really historically rooted conflict between Haman and then Mordecai, who is honored by the king, the Persian king, because he stopped a plot to kill the king. And Esther and Mordecai both are the heroes of the story. Esther goes before the king courageously, even though she could be killed. Mordecai urges her to do so. He already saved the king from a plot. And then the punishment, or the way that Haman wanted Mordecai to die is put on Haman. So there's a lot of irony here. And then the problem is that Haman wanted all the Jews killed. He convinced the king to kill all the Jews. And so the plot revolves around Haman wanting to kill all the Jews and also to kill Mordecai. And at the end of the story, both of those things are reversed. Haman is killed and his people are killed instead of the other way around. Oops, sorry about that. It's a narrative. So, we need to think about what happens, where does it happen, who does it happen to, etc. So what happens in this narrative? I already went through it. I'm going to skip over some of this because I really want you to just get sort of the big gist of what we're talking about. We're talking about a reversal, as I've already said. Haman wants one thing to happen. It happens to him instead. And you can go look up those verses. Really where I want to focus is here, and I'm going to focus here on Daniel as well, which is that in Mordecai and in Esther, but in Mordecai particularly, you've got a Jew who is faithful to God even in the midst of exile and even in the face of death. And after he is faithful, he is clothed in royal garments. All of this is said of Joseph, by the way. He's made to ride. He's proclaimed as second in command. He receives the royal ring. He's second in authority to the king. And he refuses to sin even when it's in his own best interest to do so. So Mordecai looks like a new Joseph. Esther looks like the virtuous woman. So we're talking about deliverance from exile through a king who looks like Joseph, who looks like Adam, so a new Adam, and a queen who looks like Lady Wisdom, a new Eve perhaps. That's who we're looking for, a virtuous, wise queen who is guided by a wise man like Joseph. That's what we're looking for here. I mean, it picks up the hope that we had in Psalms through Songs. We're still looking for that same person. We've just been reminded by Ecclesiastes, Lamentations, and now by the exilic setting of these books that the solution just hasn't come yet. It's not that we've changed what we're looking for, it's just that we're being reminded it still has not come. The same thing is true in Daniel. Daniel is a bit different in that the last half of the book is apocalyptic literature. So there's lots of figurative imagery. There's lots of focus on the end times. There's lots of focus on the heavenly and spiritual realms. But Daniel is really focused on return from exile. That's what he's concerned about. So that both halves of these books are about exile. First half is about Daniel being faithful in exile. The second half is about God delivering his people from exile. I don't know why the PowerPoint is doing that. My apologies. So you got the structure of the book here, and I'm not going to focus on these. You've got the narrative portion, which is focused on exile, focused on faithfulness. Daniel is faithful in the midst of persecution. Daniel looks like Joseph, just like Mordecai does. Daniel interprets dreams like Joseph. Daniel is raised to a high status just below the king like Joseph, etc. So that Daniel, Mordecai, and Esther are pictures of men and women who are going to bring us out of exile. The visions shift our focus to the future when God will deliver his people from exile. So we have a shift from the exilic context to future restoration. And that's going to happen through God's messenger, who is the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man. In other words, it's going to happen through Jesus Christ. So we're looking forward now again. And then the final two books in the writings are Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles. And Ezra and Nehemiah, interestingly, are read together as one book, and they both detail Israel returning from Babylon to the nation of Israel, the land. And when they get to the land, they rebuild the temple in Ezra and Nehemiah. Now, the interesting thing is that the prophets who prophesied during this period are Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, and none of these guys are positive about what Ezra and Nehemiah do when they come back. They're all saying, no. What you're doing, that's not our hope. We're still looking for our hope. And in fact, these books actually give that message as well, the way these books are written. Because if you look at Ezra and Nehemiah, what you see is that they come back, they start to rebuild the temple, more people come back, and then what you notice at the end is that they fail to obey again by intermarrying with foreign women, which is what they did in Judges. So once again, the mistakes of Israel are being repeated. Same thing happens in Nehemiah. Nehemiah comes back, he rebuilds the wall, he renews the covenant, but again, even in these latter chapters, especially in the confession chapter, etc., there's an indication that Israel has intermingled with foreign nations. They've done what is wrong in the sight of the Lord, not because interracial marriage is sinful, it's not, but because Israel was supposed to avoid idolatry. And they couldn't avoid idolatry when they intermarried with the people in the land. And so we're focused on the return, right? We're focused on the return from exile, which Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel prophesied about. We're focused on the rebuilding of the temple. We're focused on keeping the Torah. We're focused on rebuilding the wall, on living in community. But we're finally focused on the mistakes that were made by Israel in their first movement into the land. As you read through Ezra and Nehemiah, you're going to see lots of positive things, right? So there's this guy named Zerubbabel, who's a descendant of David. They're in the land. They're rebuilding the temple. They renew the covenant. I mean, all this looks fantastic in terms of what we're hoping for in the return from exile. Ezra looks like a new Moses. He leads them out of slavery back into the land. The march to Jerusalem is similar to the march in Exodus. The time of departure, they're delayed, they're led by a priest, they celebrate the Feast of Booths, etc. I mean, all of this looks fantastic, right? So you got new Moses, new temple, in the land, led by Zerubbabel, who is a descendant of David, rebuilding the temple. Man, everything looks fantastic. Again, now you got new Exodus language, not just new Moses language. Exiles brought out. They get stuff. like they did in the Exodus. The temple vessels are returned, which is prophesied in Isaiah 52. Ezra is from the line of Aaron. Um, he explains the law to the people, much like Moses stood up on the mountain and explained the law. But the problem is, this isn't the promised return, because Zerubbabel just sort of disappears. So the Davidic king is gone again. The enemies of God's people are not subdued because they experience serious opposition in Ezra and Nehemiah. And then I've already mentioned the intermarriage issue. The issue is harlotry and idolatry. They're not able to obey still. They need a new heart, a new spirit. So it's not the return. Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi aren't convinced of it. Ezra, Nehemiah aren't convinced of it, or the writer of them isn't convinced of it. In Daniel 9, the latter days are far in the future. We're still waiting on the Son of Man to come and give end times judgment. And we don't see the fulfillment of Isaiah 65 and 66, specifically the renewal of creation. So it's not this great event that we get the second temple. We're still waiting on the new temple. One last thing to think about with Ezra and Nehemiah, and then we'll get to Chronicles and be done. Ezra and Nehemiah should be before Esther, chronologically. And it should be after Chronicles, chronologically. Think about this. Esther, Daniel, we've got a new Moses. Ezra, Nehemiah, new Joseph. And after Joseph, in the Pentateuch, comes Moses. In Ezra and Nehemiah, we get a new Moses, but he failed. So what are we looking for in Chronicles? We're still waiting for 2 Chronicles 36. For them to go back into the land and rebuild the temple. We're still waiting for that event, which should tell us how to read Chronicles. Chronicles is an eschatological book, helping us to look forward. Chronicles should go before Ezra and Nehemiah, because the last event in Chronicles is the first event in Ezra and Nehemiah. So let's walk through the book, and then we'll see what it means. Genealogies, they go from, in this instance, Adam to David. Remember in Genesis, we got in very short amount of time, we got from Adam to Abraham. Well, now here we get from Adam to David. Then we deal with the united monarchy, and then the divided monarchy and exile. So this is a whole history of Israel. Some themes here. David is a big theme. So we're waiting on a new David. A new David who fulfills the covenant to David, who unites Israel, who rebuilds the temple. Childs calls the chronicler's exegesis typological exegesis. One of my former professors called it eschatological exegesis. So it describes the past in a way that portends the future. It's not just a history book. It's using the past to hope for the future. And it's hoping for a new Adam and a new David. Like I said, Genesis moves from Adam to Abraham very quickly. Chronicles moves from Adam to David. So we're looking for a new Adam who is of the seed of Abraham and of the line of David. So we've been looking for the whole Old Testament. We also see parallels between Moses and Joshua and David and Solomon. Moses and David are both disqualified. Moses doesn't enter the land. David doesn't build the temple. And then Joshua does enter the land. Solomon doesn't enter the temple. The phrases that are used in succession, so from Moses to Joshua and then David to Solomon, are very similar in terms of obeying the law, passing it down, all the rest. Moses and David announce their successors privately and then publicly. Joshua, Solomon, immediate enthusiastic support. God magnifies both Joshua and Solomon, etc. And you can go look these up in David Howard's Introduction to the Old Testament. In any case, the point is, with what the writer of Chronicles is doing is showing us we're looking for a new Adam of the line of Abraham, of the line of David, who looks like a new Moses, new Joshua, new David, new Solomon. I mean, we're just summing it all up, really. Adam is placed as a priest in the garden temple in Genesis 1 and 2, and in Chronicles we're expecting the son of David to come back and rebuild the temple. So, what we have here then is that Deuteronomy ends with an expectation of a prophet like Moses. The prophets end with the expectation of the return of Elijah. Chronicles ends with eschatological expectation, namely of new Adam, new David language. And in Matthew 1:1, what we get is the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ. So the book of the genealogy, Biblos Genesios. That's the same Greek phrase in Genesis 2:4 and Genesis 5:1 about Adam. Of Jesus Christ, the son of David, who Chronicles was looking for, the son of Abraham, who Genesis was looking for. Christ is the fulfillment of the entire Old Testament. Everything we've been waiting for finds its fulfillment in Jesus Christ. All of the eschatological hope, all of the narrative hope, all of the poetic hope, all of it finds its culmination in Jesus Christ. And this is what I want you to hear out of this class, is that every page of your Old Testament points forward to Christ, because he is the fulfillment of everything that Israel hoped for. I hope that blesses you and encourages you. As we finish up this class, my hope for you is that you have been able to see the beauty of Christ in the Old Testament. Please let me know if you have any questions.